I think God is saying to his people, start thinking in a different way. Start being more agile, more daring. Step out of the box. Do strange things. Walk out of your comfort zone. Instead of seeking the nice church with a steeple and build it like that, no, I want you now to go and take a warehouse and convert it in the middle of the city. You'll have, you know, when we bought our first building in Roxbury, as I said, it was the most crime-ridden place in Boston. And we bought this 4-story warehouse, which doesn't look at all on the outside what it looks inside. And it was, you know, as I say, it was the worst place in the world. We came from Cambridgeport, Massachusetts, originally, where we had inherited a beautiful red brick 19th century church, classic, priceless stained glass, an organ that had been done by a major organ builder. You know, it's beautiful pews and everything in it. It was classic, right in the middle of Cambridgeport. Sedate. You could walk out of there at 3 o'clock in the morning, no problems. And then God calls us into the inner city to leave that building that we didn't pay a cent for because we inherited it from a church that had died out. Conservative Baptist church, actually, in Cambridgeport. And he calls us into the city. And so we took this building. I didn't know anything about building. I stupidly thought that I could do this for $70,000. We ended up almost $1 million spending on it. But I know God blinds you so that you don't see things before you go into them. Otherwise, you never would. And my point being that right now, that church, I mean, if I were to try to buy that building now, impossible. One studio next door to us cost much more than the whole building, plus a small parking lot cost us at the time. And, you know, the whole area has been transformed. We are literally about a minute from exit 18 off Route 93. We're about 3 minutes from, about 5 minutes, let me not exaggerate, from the airport. We are in the center. We are less than a mile away from the center of downtown Boston. I mean, you know, it's so centrally located. Me, if it would have been left to me 18 years ago, I would have gone outside of the city. You know, I had no idea of the strategic way that God wanted to know. He said, I want to place you right in the center. I'm going to change this area. And you're going to be in the center of the city. And there you can exercise influence in a much more powerful way. God always has thought those things. God is the most powerful strategic thinker. So we got to start thinking in terms of, you know, stop thinking in terms of the nice, clean. It's beautiful. That's necessary. I admire this church and I want to learn from it. By the way, I don't know who the pastor is, but I really want to meet him because there's a lot of amazing things here. But I'm saying, you know, I was speaking to another gentleman. They had their churches in this place, auto parts, and you know, apparently God, you know, that little place there is a hub of activity. So and sometimes God may want us into these. God may take us into these counterintuitive strategies. Because he's a strategic thinker, and we have to be open to it. Because if you're just thinking squarely, and you know, with a 1,000-year-old technology, and metaphors, and so on and so forth, you will lose out on this God, who now wants to appear clad like a punk rocker. And I don't know. I mean, it doesn't reduce his greatness or his lordship or his holiness. Now, he's just incredibly agile. He loves to do amazing things. He doesn't take himself that seriously. He does indeed, but he also he's creative. He's infinitely creative, and he wants us to be like him, also. So we got to step out of the box. We got to start thinking in ways that may surprise us. We got to take analogies and turn them upside down and see what we see, and find out what, you know, if we look at them in a different way, do they reveal something different? If we use a different language, what happens? If we change the seating arrangement, if we move to a new place, if we open a new site, whatever, that stuff is not sacred. That's negotiable. What's sacred is the Word, the revelation, the character of God, the fruit of the Spirit, the theology that founds the church. Everything else is up for grabs. And let me aim well here. And so, you know, that to me is why these kinds of things are important. I may have gone off too far, but that's okay. I mean, you know, it's all part of the same thing. So Again, the chicken farm analogy, what it helps us to think, it forces us to think in those new terms, new/old eternal terms that God wants us to think in this time of history, where the world out there requires a lot more economy of energy. We cannot conquer the world the way God wants, and we cannot manage God's modern technology that He wants to download into us with the channels that we have. They were good for another era, but not for now. It doesn't mean, again, that we abandon the supernatural. The traditional model of the pastor does not lend itself to larger, dynamic, growing churches. Emphasize traditional. And often it does not lend itself to urban, dynamic, postmodern environments. I think that technology of the pastor taking care of one sheep at a time and becoming intimately involved with one sheep at a time is not conducive to the kind of massive impact that God wants us to have. Also, the stresses on pastors and the pastoral family are such, and the level of demonic activity that has been released on the world is such that we need something a lot more agile, dynamic, and movable, because it is, in the military they speak of, what is it, asymmetrical warfare. And of having to adjust to asymmetrical warfare. That means that you cannot fight somebody in the jungles of Vietnam or in the urban environments of Iraq the same way that you fought people in a big theater in the 19th or 18th century, where armies would just meet in a big place outside of the innocents and fight. You cannot fight Palestinian terrorists who are inside the homes of innocent civilians the way you fight an isolated army in a mountain or in a valley. And that, unless the army adjusts to that new situation, where politics are just as important as weapons, and mass media add another quality to war, and disinformation and so on and so forth add all kinds of new elements into warfare. If you're trying to fight the traditional warfare with incredibly complex situations, you will lose. Just like America lost the Vietnam War and is losing Afghanistan as well. We won't call it a defeat, but that's what it ultimately will be, because these are different situations, and where just massive accumulation of guns, and it's not enough. You're dealing with millennial cultures. You're dealing with vastly isolated spaces. You're dealing with value systems that allow people to blow themselves up and think that's the greatest thing that happened to them. Doing warfare, and you're dealing with media that bring every mistake out into the open and just explode it into huge, huge things. It's a different thing. So I think we're dealing with a level of complexity in the 21st century that requires that the church adapt to a guerrilla kind of warfare, a more agile, dynamic, creative kind of warfare, and also more technologically oriented. And at the same time knowing that it's all spirit and all the glory must come to God. That requires highly holy, sanctified, praying, powerful men and women waging the warfare. Because I think that's part of the whole thing. So, in my opinion, the traditional model of the pastor does not lend itself to larger, dynamic, growing churches. That's why, to me, the model of the chicken farmer, again, don't take me too seriously on that, seems more illuminating in this respect. Like the farmer, the main function of the senior pastor, or even of the major leaders, should be to oversee the overall environment of the congregation. To maintain the space, underlying space, where the interactions between parishioners take place.